Hey everybody, my name is Jim Freimer. I'm the festival director of Out on Film, and thanks for joining us this year. This is our 34th year of telling stories for, by, and about our community and its allies. This is our first hybrid festival where we have films in cinema and we have films virtually as well. And thank you so much for joining us. I am delighted today that we're talking to the director and writer of The Star of the Sixth Rail, and I'm gonna read a short description of the movie, and then we'll introduce our guest. In The Sixth Reel, a down on his luck movie collector discovers a legendary lost film and becomes entangled in an outrageous adventure to deliver it to the right hands before it is lost forever. The film is directed and written by Carl Andress and the legendary Charles Busch. Charles also stars as well. Thank you two for joining us today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Hi.
This is such a fun movie. I watched it a few months ago, and it just sort of hit all the right spots for me. I just completely captivated by it. So thank you all for doing this.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I guess you don't see too many lighthearted romps these days. Mad cat paper films.
Especially in the film festival. I mean, this year we've gotten a lot of dark dramas and serious topics. And I read the description of this film and saw the cast. I was like, oh, this is just so up my alley. And I watched it. It was completely up my alley. So yeah, exactly. It was perfect timing. But before we talk about the film, I just want to talk about you two, because I mean, you've known each other for a while. How long have you two been working together?
We recently figured out that it's been about 25 years, but it feels like, it feels like forever and just yesterday. Time does go by when you suddenly say 25 years, you're like, wow. It's pretty remarkable.
I'm at an age now where it's getting to be like 50-year landmarks, 40-year landmarks. 25 is a newbie. Just met him.
What do you two like about working with each other?
Well, I think it's because we have a lot of fun. We laugh a lot, and we have a lot of similar frame of reference, and we're just so in sync. Wouldn't you say, Charles?
Well, that's the thing. I know some people who joined us for this movie for the first time. The director of photography, and different people were wondering what it was going to be like working with two directors. And I knew that was never going to be an issue, because Carl and I really 99% or even more are always in agreement. And knowing that one half of a point of agreement, I don't know, I usually give in. I feel, Carl's so passionate about things. He's so passionate about it. I just, let him do it, yeah. But that's like one tiny, really, it's like less than 1% of the time that we're just not always in agreement. It's a little peculiar.
Yeah, I mean, usually we could just sort of see into what, each other's vision or each other's point of view, and just sort of get it, and either say, yeah, I'm with you on that, and I think that's the way to go, or maybe we should talk about it. But, we don't fight, we don't argue.
No, we've worked together, we've done so many plays, it's really in the theater that we've, our major collaboration has been. And Carl's always the sole director of all these plays. But I like butting in and giving my notions, and most directors in the theater, it's very strict that the playwright or an actor never talks to the other actors. But in our case, since we are so in sync, Carl is never afraid or insecure to not let me just also most of the time we've worked with only our best friends. So the line has always been, so how do you not talk about the play with somebody that you've worked with for 20 years?
Well, and and when we're doing a play too, sometimes these actors will be acting opposite the playwright, and so if they're having questions or they need to understand the impulse, well, the impulse is right here. It's not like we have to sort of uncover it with the playwright who's not in the room. But if the playwright is going to be playing the scene opposite you, it behooves one to say, like, well, let's have a conversation, and Charles say, like, where did the scene come from, and then let's edit, let's figure out how we're going to move it around, and that sort of thing. So it really has always been a conversation, always a collaboration, and and never an argument. Never, because there's no reason to do this. We always like to, just like to have fun, it's like, it's called a play. So if we're not having fun, how's the audience going to have fun?
The one time we actually had an argument was when Carl created the role of the son in the play Die Mommy Die, when we did it first in LA. And we don't have to go into the whole thing, but it was a 2-show day. We'd done the matinee, and something happened during the performance that, I got overwrought and just got very angry at Carl, and he got very upset that I got angry at him. And so we had a long dinner break for the next show, and Carl you were very young. He was in his mid-20s, but he wasn't sort of speaking to me. So finally I just said, Carl, in an hour and a half you're gonna be forgiving me, so can we just like shorten that so you forgive me now so we can have dinner? And he said okay.
See the wisdom in it.
Exactly. I wreck up dinner when you're gonna forgive me anyway. So
Yeah.
Get over it. Yeah.
So you two, from what I understand, you two started developing the idea for this film over Skype.
Yeah, we a couple years ago we had come into contact with this wonderful young producer, Ash Christian, who unfortunately passed away last year, and we wanted to do a project with him, and we had an idea that ultimately was just going to be very expensive and challenging to raise the money. But so we didn't want to wait all that time. We thought, well, let's come up with some idea that we could do on a low budget. Like, what would that story be? So we sort of had the idea that we got to get on this, and then we did a play in New York called The Confession of Lily Dare, with primary stages off Broadway, that was running through the winter. And we figured, well, once we get through the play, then we can really focus on what this new project should be. And so the play finished its run on March 5th. And then by March 12th, the theater in New York, everything was shut down. So, we were locked up in our separate homes and just said, well, what if we Skype and we just like start talking, because we need something to do. And then we sort of, started ruminating on ideas that we've had over the last few years about it. Well, if we make another movie, what should that movie be?
Yeah. And so, and we had 12 years ago or more, we did a movie called Very Serious Person, which was a very serious movie. But we before we landed on that plot, we had actually thought about something of a caper movie set in the milieu of classic film collectors. Whole different storyline, but we did have just the that sense of that world that we wanted to talk about.
And that story was going to be very complicated. Again, very, very expensive. We usually just end up like, coming up with ideas for movies that would be very expensive when you really get down to it. Lots of characters, lots of locations, costumes, etc.
Trip to Romania usually happens somewhere in between.
Several wigs, many wigs. And so we were like, well, what if we were going to do that? But what if we really just made it sort of like a conversational movie, like this was going to be a movie about people who talk and who are verbal, as opposed to, going all over the place. And so then we really if we go too far, then we'd have to pull it back, like we'd be talking about a sequence, then I'd be like, and then the truck pulls up, and Charles would be like, no, we can't have the truck.
Jump in the truck, and and then they go down the highway, and no, we can't.
And even once we finally have the screenplay, and we were developing the shot list with the DP, and we were trying to come up with some solution as if this was the location, how would the other characters see them? And she suggested, well, we could have a car drive in. We're like, no. and ultimately the producers were like, thank you so much for avoiding the car, because it's going to, we couldn't get permission from the city, et cetera, et cetera. It's funny how limitations will, make things come out better than what you thought. But yeah, so we started developing the story.
Okay.
Over Skype, and we would be on Skype for sometimes 4 or 5 hours a day.
Wow.
We got it done very quickly. It's easier in a way. We found it was less distracting when Carl and I are actually in the same place. You can get distracted by, oh, did you see this thing I just bought, or whatever. So yeah, when you're on Skype, you stick to the point. No, but we move fast. We get things done. When we do plays, we're used to turning them around quickly and rehearsing just a few weeks, and we're fast movers.
Yeah.
Was this a hard film to get funded?
Well, we sort of had an investor sort of lined up who was willing to be involved, and so that sort of arrangement was developed with Ash, and so like that side of the equation was sort of like in place once we had the screenplay going.
Yeah.
We really didn't have to. That was another miracle, is that because the budget was low and because we were being very clever about how we were planning the movie, Ash was able to sort of pull things together relatively quickly. And before we knew it, we were starting to, go out to actors and go out to crew members and starting. And, last summer we were pulling together a company, which was insane.
Yeah. It's a very unshowbizy way of doing a movie. There weren't multiple investors and people and producers who have many ideas, and therefore there weren't any compromises that had to be made to make people feel that their jobs are being justified. None of that was in this movie. It really was more akin to when we do a play off Broadway.
Yeah, exactly.
Charles, can you tell me a little bit about Jimmy?
Oh, my character.
Yeah.
Well, it's most of my career has been playing female characters.
Yes.
in my plays and movies. So it's always been a bit of a challenge for me when I play my own sex. And for Carl and I to figure out who is this character, and would he be fun for me to play and for the audience, to see. And I love playing disreputable people. I never like playing characters who are totally on the side of the angels and who are always right. Plus, I think I have a theory. I think particularly like in television, most of the TV shows that we've loved, the main character, like Lucy or whoever, is usually wrong, from the start, and that's kind of where the comedy comes in. So I like the idea that Jimmy is this somewhat down on his luck, but very very driven movie, classic film collector and dealer, and almost all the characters in the movie just have some terrible history with him, but he comes into this incredible miracle of finding this lost film, and then of course he's in a crisis of conscience, what to do with it. Does he do the right thing and give it to a museum or TCM, where it can be enjoyed by and appreciated by everyone, or does he sell it to a private dealer for a huge amount of money and it'll never be seen again? So that's his crisis of conscience, but he doesn't have terribly much conscience. He's a lot of fun to play. And then of course too, I just always wanted to be in a film, first of all shot in my own neighborhood in Greenwich Village, but where my longtime stage buddy Julie Halston and I would be running around in crazy disguises and acting, madcap. And so we always thought that at certain points I would get into drag, but not playing a woman, but that I'm in disguise to achieve my goal.
Okay.
Yeah, and I thought I had always wanted to get Charles and Julie together in a movie because their stage chemistry is so magical that I thought it would be really great since we're creating this project, what if we, tried to capture that with a relationship between Charles and Julie in a movie. And so that's how we came about putting them together and pitting them with each other.
Yeah, that's another relationship that's now about, oh my God. I mean, I think I've met Julie almost 40 years ago.
Wow.
And we've been performing together since 1984.
Wow.
Yeah.
So once you had your locations secured, can you talk a little bit about filming during COVID? Because I read earlier that you managed to film during COVID safely, obviously. Not one person got sick.
Right.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I think that's one of the proudest achievements. Besides, artistically, we're very pleased with the movie, but that the fact that we had a team who was able to keep 80 people COVID free for a month
Mhm.
during the height of the pandemic and September, October.
The vaccine hadn't come yet, so
So
we
we
were
were
vulnerable.
shielded and we weren't in a bubble or anything. It was just in the world and masking and shielding and
Oh,
constant testing.
but we were in a bubble in a
And we
way.
were staying in a hotel with the public. A bubble means that we would be like really like our 80 people would be alone and not facing the public, not going to a grocery store, not doing
We went
anything.
to the grocery store.
Yeah, so we were sort of in the world. So it was a miracle that everybody sort of stayed true to it. But there was a certain point, when we first wrote the movie, we had specific people's apartments in New York City in mind that we would film at. Like that's the idea, in a low budget movie, you film in locations and maybe only do a couple of sets on sound stages for like a tax credit. But in this case, it was going to be impossible to have a film crew and a cast in an apartment, in an actual apartment, and just be too small and prohibitive. So the producers decided that we should move it and build sets on a soundstage in upstate New York, which were available because nobody was shooting anything really at that point.
Okay.
So we went full speed ahead and built 2 4-walled sets and 3 sort of 2-walled sets, and used a portion of the soundstage itself to create a set. So it was really kind of wonderful that we were able to do all of that. It really felt like we were making a movie,
Yeah, none of us.
at
Yeah,
Warner
'cause
Brothers.
none of us really had that experience of shooting an entire movie on sound stages,
Soundstage.
because we all come from the world of indie film, where it is always on location. Now that was very exciting, wonderful. You never want to go back.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's, but
it saved us time because the lighting, you could have everything sort of set up and you didn't have to spend part of your day breaking it down. And we also we shot in only 15 days, and we stayed to the strict, it adhered to the strict rule of 10-hour days. So it was very compressed.
Yeah, we did a few days on location in New York, in the neighborhood. You can't fake Greenwich Village and Fishkill. You just can't do it.
Yeah, there was hopes. They were like, do you think there's any neighborhood here in Newburgh or Beacon or Fishkill that could give you New York City, Greenwich Village? And absolutely not.
Yeah, but it was kind of funny though, that at one point we were shooting actually right outside my own apartment house, and Julie and I were doing a scene, and Greenwich Village and where I live is just home to every old curmudgeon in the world, and so the camera was rolling. We were right, Julie and I were acting just face to face, and some old man walked right between us and looked at me and said, "Mask." I said, don't you see, I'm performing, I'm in the middle of the scene. So that happened a couple of times.
Yeah.
Because some of it was a little catch can, where we would just set up the cameras outside and hope for the best. So yeah, so people would just walk in the middle of the scene. Yeah.
And it was also interesting because we just having to avoid like passersby in the background because we didn't want this movie to be seen like it was made during COVID with everybody masked, because that makes for a whole different interaction in every single scene where you have to be masked. So we wanted to have a sort of a timeless quality, but we would, have to like reshoot and pause to wait for people strolling by,
on a bicycle,
background on bicycles. Yeah, it was usually it's just sound that you're worried about, like, oh, here comes the truck or here comes the car, but it's like, oh gosh, here comes family with the masks on. Let them go.
I have to ask you about this amazing ensemble. I mean, there's just so many great people in this. Can you talk about the other people in this film?
Well, we were fortunate. I hate to say that, we took advantage of a worldwide pandemic, and that there were a number of people, since there was no Broadway, people who were in Broadway shows were available and thrilled to get out of the house. So we really have an amazing cast of people. We have Margaret Cho, but and Tim Daly, but then the rest of our cast are almost all Tony winners or nominees.
nominees and legends. It's like it was really kind of wonderful. And
Isaiah Shields, yeah, just amazing.
yeah, and what's also fun is Doug Plout, who plays Rodney in the film. He's such a big fan of Broadway history and the connections, and like he sort of was mapping out like all everybody in our cast and how the 6 degrees of separation worked from they did this musical together, but then they did so and so did this play together, and there was just sort of like this wonderful chart of how everybody was connected from the past, and that was really a lot of fun.
Yeah. We had a lot of members of the original cast of Hair in our show.
Really? Okay. This film is still pretty early in its run. It premiered, I think, at Outfest.
Yes.
And it's obviously doing some festivals this fall. Where will the film go from here? Will it be, is the ultimate goal to get in theaters or streaming, or what's the ultimate goal?
Like all of the above. We're really just starting on the festival circuit and looking at opportunities where the best fit would be. So we're sort of just starting on that part of the journey. It's so interesting with the film. You go from it's coming up with an idea, writing it, then pre-production, then production, and then post, and each one is so full, and artistically, creatively, and takes such concentration. And then just as much as like once it's completed, to put it out in the world and get it a chance to be seen through festivals, and then sales agents and distributors, and then hopefully on to, like you said, the theatrical presentations and streaming opportunities. So
okay. Yeah. Great. I have to ask you about Ash Christian, because I think all of us were just stunned when Ash passed last year. He was so very young, but he's also someone who had been in the industry such a long time and had done so much at a very young age.
35.
Exactly. Can you talk about Ash and his involvement with the film, and
I'll start just by saying that because I didn't know him, but Doug Plout, the young man who plays Rodney in our movie,
yes,
he was in Hurricane Bianca 2, and so he knew Ash. And Doug, Carl and I really, as Carl had said, we had dreams of making doing a film version of a play we had done called The Divine Sister, which was a very elaborate thing. But anyway, so I was just looking around for any possible way of getting that movie made. And then Doug brought me with him to the New York premiere of Hurricane Bianca 2. And I was so impressed with how well made that film was, and I knew that it cost about the price of a roll of stamps, but it just it looked really great, and just my mind was ticking, and I met Ash afterwards, and he said, oh, I said, I'd love to work with you. He said, I'd like to work with you. I said, you got to meet Carl, and then we took it from there.
Yeah, we had a series of meetings with him, conversations, and he was always just so enthusiastic and can do, and like, let's do this. And, he, by hook or by crook, he was going to make a movie, and, it wasn't going to be the Divine Sister at that yet, but then when we thought, well, let's do something that we can raise some money on. And even though it was COVID and everything, he was not to be deterred. So he was just so full of life and so full of joy. And I think one of his greatest gifts was putting people together and just finding teams, really team building. Everybody who's known him has wonderful things to say about him, and it's really, really special. And so he had put together this whole group with us, and so when he passed, it was shocking and surprising because he was so young, and we all really felt the need to move on because he started us on this journey. And so it was important to everybody to continue his legacy, because that's what we all think he would have encouraged us to do. So we just felt very sort of blessed by him. And at the same time, one of the people that we put together was Wolf Snyder, was our sound engineer on the movie, who had and he was an interesting person who also died tragically at age 35, just after we finished the movie. But he was a sound engineer on Nomadland as well.
Wow.
And he's unique in that he could be the boom operator and the sound engineer on set. He could do both positions equally well, and he was great for when you're doing a movie during COVID, because it was one less person on the crew, which was, you know, a very important consideration when we were putting this together. And so it was, you know, we thought he was just another wonderful person who we got through our connections with Ash, and it was very sad that he died young as well. So the film is dedicated to both their memories.
Yeah, he was a darling young man. It's so interesting, the world of indie filmmaking and sort of indie playmaking are so separate that I remember the very first day Julie and I were on set, and after we finished, Wolf came up to me and said, "Oh, you and Julie, you have such expressive voices. Have you ever done like a play?" I said, "That's all we do," you know. So it was just he was a darling kid, and
Absolutely.
and what was nice with Wolf, at least for me, that I did get, you know, we all were staying in this one motel up in Fishkill, and weren't allowed to socialize with each other either. It was all real strict, you know. It's like being in the dorm. And one night I happened just to walk outside, and he was just sort of having a smoke, you know, and we had this long chat for, you know, about an hour, and just he was so sweet, and I was just so glad that I at least had a chance to get to know him a bit, because we really were not we
we weren't allowed to go to dinner. We had to like do everything alone.
No,
Yeah.
you know, we weren't allowed to even lunch. They kept us all separated. So, you know, the few moments you have of a human connection really stood out.
Absolutely. One of the things, you know, this is a movie about movies. I think it's incredibly timely, you know, especially at a time where, you know, Charles, I think I read an interview with you where you were saying that film festivals ask you about the rights to Die Mommy Die, and you have to say, I don't know where it is. I mean, they just feel so time. Can you talk about that aspect where a lot of treasured films from a certain time just aren't readily available anymore?
Yeah, well, there's a history of that, really. In a way, that's what our movie is about.
Yeah.
The lost Lon Chaney movie. But yeah, it goes on to this day. Well, you know, movies, the way things are financed, and they're different people, and then there becomes an ownership question of who actually at this point owns it. You know, the Die Mommy Die, it had been, it was odd in that when we won an award at Sundance for it, and then Sundance decided to, as an experiment, to take 3 of their festival hits and distribute them in theaters. And so ours was one of them. It was very exciting. But then they ended that. That was it, just that one year. So then there's the question of, then where does the movie, who owns it now? And it's just been so difficult. And it's a movie I'm very proud of, and people, you know, it has a genuine cult following, and I keep trying to find out, you know, I think they found the Titanic. You know, they know what happened to Amelia Earhart. Surely we can find out, you know, who owns Die Mommy Die. I've been just a few weeks ago, I placed a call to one of the survivors of the project to find out if he could look into it. So we'll see, because I would love it to be available. I mean, I guess you can find copies of it on eBay or Amazon.
But it's not streamable. And that's the same thing with the movie we talked about earlier, A Very Serious Person. You know, it was just, you know, it was basically on DVD, but like you can't find it anymore. And so, you know, we've recently found there's interest in sort of getting it digitized, which would be great. But it's like where does the actual film exist? Where is it? You know, and like, because it's just it's so easy, especially in that transition between when things were still you know, on film, and to them when they're digitized. But even when they're
Exactly.
digitized, they have to be on a drive, and that drive has to exist somewhere. And with a small film, it's like, well, where does it end up? And then if a company's sold, and where do assets go? And oh,
Yeah.
it's really complex.
I tried to get the rights to show from The Wedding Banquet. Are you familiar with The Wedding Banquet by Ang Lee?
Yeah,
And
love
I was
that movie.
surprised because it had lapsed. And I was told that no one has the rights to The Wedding Banquet. I said, no one has the rights to The Wedding
Really?
Banquet by
That's
Ang
fascinating.
Lee?
I mean, yeah,
I
that's
did.
the craziest thing. Well, isn't it? It's like who was the artist who recently just got ownership of her tapes for her? Is a recording artist who finally owns her recordings now, so she can put them out. There's a famous person recently was like, they finally own their tapes. It's not the studio or the, you know, the label anymore. She finally got them.
Mhm.
But like, you know, when somebody buys something from you, they own it. And then if they drop the ball, or you don't know what happens. It doesn't always revert back to you.
Exactly. So what's next for both of you?
Well, Charles is working on a new play, and we're working together on a new screenplay and
Hmm.
coming up with ideas, and you know, and then you know, we'll be hunting around for the next investors.
And it's so funny, just this week, just a couple of days ago, you know, we had been working on we keep switching ideas for this next movie. And first it was going to be a horror movie, and then that seemed too expensive to make because you needed the house, you know. And then we started getting this great idea for a rather Altman-esque multi-character tapestry of a film, and we came up with just marvelous ideas. But then again, just 2 days ago, we thought this movie would cost at least $10 million to do it right. So now we're
So these go on the back burner, and we're back to like, how do we make a contained film?
We're looking at I have very few plays in the trunk, but I've been so lucky that almost everything I've ever written, we've just done, you know. And but I do have a play that we were reinvestigating, that it could actually be quite an interesting film. So that happened just 24 hours ago.
We'll see if that one sticks by next week, you know.
Exactly. I'm encouraged, but I go to Broadway as much as I can. I love theater. I'm encouraged by the fact that theaters are reopening and people are, but how long do you think it'll take, Charles, before, you know, it's back to somewhat normal on Broadway?
I can't imagine. I mean, it's just, yeah, I'm curious to see how this really proceeds.
Sure.
You know?
I think it'll be a question of tourists, you know, first, you know, tourists feeling comfortable coming back and staying in hotels and going to restaurants, as well as international tourists, when that can happen. That it's, you know, to get the business going and lifeblood pumping through again.
And what happens with the, you know, with this strange all these variants, and what, you know, yeah, I just don't know. I've got a couple of things. Yeah, I you know, I have, among my various careers, I'm also a glamorous cabaret entertainer, and I was just asked to make my first post-COVID cabaret appearance in New York. For I guess I shouldn't be announcing it, since, you know, places always want to put their announcements up. But anyway, in New York. So I'll be back New Year's Eve on the bandstand. So hopefully.
Congratulations. The film is The Sixth Rail. Charles, Carl, thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure talking to both of you. Thanks so much for the film.
Oh, thank you
so much for talking to us today. I really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Enjoy this festival.
Thanks so much.